Welcome back to ReadingBear. Today, we will take a look at some new malicious compliance stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
You want gas reimbursement for driving to a different store? Let me do the math real quick. This happened about 5 years ago, when I was working at an auto parts store. I worked at a large store. It was the super hub for my region, so we literally had people drive from out of state when they couldn't wait a few days for a part. Most people were happy to do so if they could get an unusual part the same day. So a guy came in, told me what parts he needed and said, "Hey man, I had to drive all the way from another store to get here, can I get like a 10% discount?" Now, asking for a discount because you had to drive further than expected is already pretty weird. I don't know of any stores that reimburse you for gas money. But on top of that, he was buying two $600 shocks for a Mercedes. I explained to this man that we don't do discounts for driving for another store, and that a lot of customers have to do this, because parts aren't universal and we can't keep every part in every store. This turned into a 5 to 10 minute back and forth of him trying to convince me to give him a discount, and me trying to explain that I would get fired, more likely demoted, if I gave him a $120 discount for no reason. Eventually I asked him what store he came from. It was only 4 miles away. I started to get really upset because it was literally the closest store you could drive to, but then I realized he was only asking for gas money. So I asked him what kind of mileage his car got. He told me with a confused look on his face, as I pulled out a calculator. I did some quick math and told him with a smile on my face, "Okay sir, we will give you a discount to cover your gas money." Not realizing what was going on, he brightened and said thank you. Then I told him that because he only drove a few miles to get here, the discount would come out to 75 cents. He started complaining again, so I cut him off and told him, "I'm sorry sir, that's all I can do. Feel free to go get these somewhere else." To which he responded, "They don't have these anywhere else." So I told him that was a shame and asked him if he still wanted the discount. He said yes. The next one is titled, "You want my truck wash after I said it'll destroy your car? Okay, go ahead." Concrete mixers are big, ungainly things. Trying to maneuver them around a crowded job site is like trying to play miniature golf with a tennis ball. The biggest problem is, of course, other people, specifically other people's cars. Nobody is going to lug 50 pounds of tools any further than they have to, so if there is an open space near where they want to be, they park there, never mind that it is right next to a sidewalk or directly across from a driveway that a crew is obviously prepping. It only makes things worse when it's done by people who should know better, and done intentionally. So, we're pumping grout walls in the late afternoon, which already has me in a bit of a mood. Grout jobs tend to be very slow. Each cinder block has 2 cells, and the crew pumps the grout into those cells, filling them all the way to the top of the wall. Grout is really just a term for a weak concrete mix that is pumped super wet. It has to be that wet to make it all the way to the bottom of the wall, otherwise, it sticks to the sides of the cinder blocks, or gets caught up on steel reinforcement. There is a lot of stopping and starting, as well as a lot of moving the pump. It all takes time, during which that concrete starts to go off and stiffen up. Things only get worse on a hot day, and the subs will do anything to get more water in the load. As we move to a new street, we find a line of cars parked all along the side of the street we are working on, just far enough apart to take up as much space as possible without leaving enough room to get the pump in there. Turns out it is another concrete crew setting up to do patios. No problem, we're all concrete guys here, and they know how it is. We ask them to move. That I am writing this post tells you what their response was. It turns out they are waiting for their own pump and mixer to show up, and they intentionally blocked the street because they don't want us to be in their way. Their crew chief tells us we can wait for them to finish and move on, or we can just work around them. It's pretty obvious he expects us to wait. Waiting is, of course, going to make the concrete go off even more and will rack up standby charges for the customer, but trying to work around their cars is going to mean blocking the street and rolling up the hose every time we move. Normally the crew just carries it down the sidewalk, but we can't do that with the cars in the way. It would take much longer, depending on when their pump shows up. It might not even save us any time. Still, Todd the pumper rolls his pump right up next to the lead car and feeds his hose out around it. At the best of times, a concrete pump farts and sputters like a nervous chihuahua, flinging small globs of concrete out the hopper. If the driver isn't paying attention and accidentally lets the concrete level get too low, the pump sucks in air. Feeding a concrete pump air is like feeding a hippopotamus ulstra. Crap's not pretty, and it gets everywhere. We probably end up moving the pump twice as many times as we have to, but it ensures that every single one of those cars gets to spend some quality time next to the hopper. We finish with the job and are washing out the pump when the crew chief, whose own concrete and pump still haven't shown up yet, storms over to complain about all the concrete splatter on their cars. I point out that we told them we'd be pumping there and asked them to move, but they refused. At this point, he sees that I have a truck wash bucket strapped to my water tank and demands I let him use it to clean off his car. I tell him that is a terrible idea, smoking lounge on the Hindenburg levels of terrible. The stuff we use is designed to dissolve dried concrete, and it will probably damage his car. The concrete is fresh enough that he can probably just rinse it off with water. He isn't having it. He tells me to stop lying because if it doesn't damage my truck, it won't hurt his car. Besides, he's done this before and knows what he is doing. Now, keeping a concrete mixer clean is a downright Sisyphean task. No matter how hard you try, chutes overflow, pumps splatter, and plants huff cement powder all over your truck. There are a variety of chemicals used to clean off concrete, and most of the modern mixers are relatively safe for something that can dissolve concrete. Our plants provide a phosphoric acid mix. Relatively safe isn't the same as actually safe to any drivers that need it, so it's quite common for there to be a bucket of it stashed somewhere on the truck. Of course, part of what makes these chemicals safer also makes them somewhat less effective. That's why some of us will bring in our own cleaning products to fortify the company mix. These are not the friendly chemicals that will just leave you with a mild chemical burn. My bucket of fun dips down to the good old days of leaded gasoline, asbestos and red dye. No. 2. Still, I warned him, and he assured me he knew what he was doing. Besides, he's intentionally being a jackass and expected my sub to pay standby for his convenience. I let him have the bucket. I half expect him to stop when he pulls the lid off. The witch's brew in the bucket smells like Walter White's bathtub. Somehow, the fact that his nose hairs are curling up like a spider in a flame doesn't seem to faze him. Brush goes in the bucket. The brush comes out of the bucket. Brush slams onto the hood of the car with a wet slap. I can only watch in mute horror as the man proceeds to not just clear off the concrete, but bathe his entire hood in hydrochloric acid, rubbing it in to get out all those nasty water spots. It's like watching an orphan unwittingly skin his favorite puppy. None of us stick around long enough to see the final result, but it is already apparent that he has scrubbed off the clear coat and is in the process of etching brush marks in the paint. I don't want to be anywhere near him when that hood dries out. I let him keep the bucket. The next one is titled, "Don't Want to Listen to the Guy Who's Been on His Machine for 30 Years? Guess You Don't Need Your Fingers." Back in the early 2000s, I was a management trainee for a manufacturing company in the UK, and I was responsible for quality control and production management. I was 22 years old, keen as punch and ready to change the world. About 11 months into the role, I got a new boss. Let's call him Fred. Fred was also the company owner's son and was basically a 45-year-old giant toddler who had only ever been a drug dealer, DJ, and now stood to inherit the entire company. His management style was, let's say, interesting, and he would deviate from screaming at you for the most benign thing ever to "I can't deal with the pressure so I'll go home for the day" in a matter of hours. He also thought he was a manufacturing genius. His ideas were crazy, but he would scream at anyone who questioned him. There was a 52-year-old machine operative, let's call him Roy, who has worked on the same machine for over 30 years. Roy could tell when his machine was 2 weeks away from a breakdown, just because it sounded different. He was truly at one with his machine. Fred decided that we would modify Roy's machine so that we could extend the range of products we could manufacture. In order to do this, he decided that we would add an additional spindle to the machine. The problem was that each product would finish at a different time and you would need to remove a product from the machine while the other one was still spinning. Roy protested and said he'd never use it, but Fred went ahead and modified it over the weekend with a subcontractor. On Monday, Roy said, "You must be joking, I'm not using that." Fred said, "You will use it, or you'll be looking for a new job tomorrow." Roy said, "It's not safe and I won't use it. If you try to make me, I will report you to the house." And then Fred said, "If you report me, I'll make sure you don't find work ever again." So Roy smiled and said, "Okay, fine, I'll load the next job, but you can run it first." Roy loaded on his next job and took 2 steps back. He also looked at me and said, "Stand back." Fred started the machine and all went well, for about 30 seconds. The first job had reached the diameter required and Fred pressed stop. However, he now had to lean over the other job that was still running at 2000 RPM. I didn't see it happen, but I heard an awful scream and then saw blood squirting everywhere. Fred fainted onto the machine, narrowly missing the spindle with his face and greasy long black hair. We pressed the emergency stop and picked him up, and it was then I spotted his fingers in the machine. I picked up 2 middle fingers and gave them to a colleague to put into a freezer bag, which was a waste of time because they couldn't reattach them, they were too mangled. Fred never came back to work. Apparently, he told his father he wasn't cut out for running the company, and I also left about 6 months later. I saw recently that it was bought out in a management buyout and good old Roy was the operations director. Good for him. The next one is titled, "You Want to Talk to My Manager?" Okay, but speaking up won't help. Prior to being a bartender, I worked at a retail chain called Big W. I'm a nerd. I tend to switch to autopilot when tired, almost always at the end of shifts, and can be a dick when annoyed. Me in a nutshell. It's a slow Wednesday afternoon, the AC has broken again and it's about 5 degrees Celsius hotter inside than it is outside, 29 C. I'm in autopilot, rigor mortis smile on my face and retail greetings are droning out of my throat. A guy walks into my register, demanding a refund for something trivial. Probably his panties were the wrong color, I don't remember. I inform him in a monotone voice that refunds are issued by my supervisor, not me. There's a surprisingly substantial line at the supervisor's desk, people wanting cigarettes, refunds or information. He informs me that he's not waiting that long for something trivial. He demands I do it, because even someone as dumb as you can do this. Well, that snapped me out of autopilot and the smile fades. I repeat, in a much more direct tone, that only the supervisor can do refunds. The customer is having none of it. Refund my item. He demands again, saying it very slowly as if I was the dumbest potato in the strawberry patch. I am unable to, he cuts me off. I want to speak to your manager, I don't want to talk to you. Now, this is where people need to be careful with their words. As a cashier, I report directly to my supervisor, one of the 2 at the desk. They're in charge of me. My manager sits out back managing the store, and usually never has to interact with customers unless the supervisor calls him. So I nod, calling through the headset for my manager, let's call him Fred. Fred's a great guy, he tells good jokes, he's always ready to help his friends and he's a caring soul. He's also a mute, and after wrapping his vehicle around a tree as a teen, he's also deaf. As such he knows Auslan, Australian Sign Language, but can't read lips to save his life. I also can't speak Auslan at all. This probably took about 5 minutes for someone to alert Fred that he was needed and for him to come down. All this time, I'm smiling but not saying a word to the gentleman, as he told me to. He comes up to the registers, sees it's me waving him down and pulls out his personal digital assistant device to communicate with me. "What's up?" Fred types. I take the PDA and type, "Customer has a complaint, wants to speak to my manager, not me." Fred raises an eyebrow at me and I just shrug. The guy is turning red with anger, probably thinking we're ignoring him. Fred turns to the guy who launches into a full-on verbal assault that would curdle milk chocolate. Something about incompetent employees and terrible service. Fred just stands there. Eventually, the guy runs out of breath and Fred has a chance to show him the PDA with the words, "Sir, I am a deaf mute, please use this to communicate with me." The guy practically screams and storms out of the store. The next one is titled, "If I'm here, you're here." So, my job requires me to work remotely at another location. However, my actual boss is 2 hours away. The boss at my physical location doesn't seem to understand I don't actually work for him. I do however like to try to help out the people at my physical location, and for the first couple days I was there I asked if they needed anything before I went home. This apparently let the manager at my location think he's in charge of my scheduling. Not a huge deal, but recently it came to a head because I decided to leave 15 minutes early on a Friday afternoon. The following Monday, the manager of the physical location came into my office and really laid into me about leaving hours early and being unavailable. I was super taken aback by this, so I asked if he was aware he wasn't my actual supervisor. He blew up saying he's in charge of the physical location, therefore he's in charge of me. I nodded, but my gears were turning and I asked, "Well, bossman, what times do you want me here and leaving? Just so we're clear." Instantly thinking he had the edge up, he said, "If I'm here, you're here, damn it." I nodded. Sounds good. Yesterday, however, I managed to really get him. I took a week off and decided to go on a staycation. I returned to work yesterday, and after an hour he wasn't there. I checked with the floor manager and he informed me the manager wasn't going to be there today. I nodded, turned around and left at 9:15. Today he came in fuming at the ears. "Where the hell were you yesterday?" he yelled at me in my office. I just looked at him square in the face and said, "My schedule is if you're here, I'm here. You weren't here and I went home, as you instructed." He got quiet and walked out of my office. The next one is titled, "She Needs to Wear Makeup?" Okay, she'll go for the natural look. One of the first jobs my wonderful mother had was in the retail industry. Most retail brands will ask you to wear clothing similar to the style being sold, dress fashionably, and so on. This one went a step further. They asked all their female employees to wear makeup. My mother wasn't one to wear makeup at that point in her life. She found it a waste of time and money, and she did fine with the job and was actually later promoted for working well. Well, the upper management thought that her hard work was less important than the fact that she didn't wear makeup. They directly came to her and requested that she wear makeup. She refused, but they kept asking. Finally, they stipulated that if she would wear at least mascara, then they would stop with the harassment. She agreed. The next day my wonderful mother walked in wearing her brand new, clear mascara. She very proudly wore it every day after that, and the management couldn't say a thing, as she was indeed wearing mascara. The next one is titled, "You Want a Bottle of Wine?" Here, let me know how that goes for you. I work at a small Chinese restaurant that generally only has locals and regulars, with the odd visit from out of the area. Because it's so small, on a normal day or night, we will only have one waitress on a shift. We were having a relatively quiet night, so I was sitting around pouring soy sauce into bottles and cleaning chili jars. This table of 4 people walk in and they're all relatively nice, and I give them the good old casual greeting and seat them down. They do their stuff and order their meal, and for drinks, they only get table water, which is normal. When I bring out their food, the old man, henceforth asked for a bottle of the red wine. Now we don't serve alcohol, nor do we even have a bring your own. I'm not yet 18, so I can't even handle alcohol if we did. I told him we don't have any alcohol, and he goes on this rage, pointing out a bottle that was on our shelf. I knew what he was pointing to. It was our Chinese vinegar. Now, these bottles look remarkably like Asian alcohol. They're green with red on it and all the writing is in Chinese. And I told him that, "Sir, that's vinegar, not wine." He went on an alcoholic rage, yelling about how I couldn't know what alcohol was because I was underage and how I was hiding alcohol from him, and he would make a complaint on our Facebook page. His children and wife look embarrassed and are trying to hide themselves, and his wife gives me a look that just says, "Do it and he'll regret it." So I went and got a bottle of the vinegar and put it on the table. Makes a really big deal out of it, saying crap like, wasn't that easy, waitresses in my day would have done it in 2 seconds. I walk away, and when I turn around to check, he'd spat a mouthful of vinegar out and onto the plate and was trying to wash out the taste of Chinese vinegar with water. To be fair, the wife did come up to me later and apologize for his idiocy. They never made that Facebook post, and paid $20 for the bottle since we couldn't use it again. The last one is titled, "Tuck in My Shirt?" Well, tuck this. For a little background, I used to work in a call center selling vacations for a major hotel chain. My boss was a huge douche. All he did all day long was walk around and make sure everyone had their shirt tucked in, and generally be a negative jerk who everyone hated. No customers ever saw us, and we were secluded from every other department because we were really loud. If you have ever worked in outbound sales, you know what I mean. There was literally no reason to tuck in shirts, but the boss for some reason thought this would help us sell better. I was the top salesman on the night shift, and 3rd overall in the company. It didn't help at all. So I come into work on my birthday, and my friend runs up to me and yells, "Redditing while working." Happy B-Day, right in front of my boss's office. He looks up and says, "Redditing while working." I'm thinking he's going to say happy birthday since he no doubt heard her. Instead, he said, "Yeah, go ahead and tuck your shirt in," and he does the hand signal like he's tucking in an imaginary shirt. So I say, "Okay, no problem, I just have to put my stuff down real quick and I'll take care of it." So I walk over to my desk, which takes approx 7 seconds to get to. I go to put my stuff down, and as I am, he comes up behind me again and says, "Hey, I said to tuck in your shirt." So I quickly tuck it in, and as he's walking literally right by me, I say, "Sorry, I just had to put my stuff down first," and he walks by like I never said a word. Immediately, I bust out my HR manual and check out the rule on tucked-in shirts. Turns out you must tuck in all shirts except a Hawaiian shirt or a Gayabera shirt. So right after work I take my butt to Walmart and buy 10, and wear the most obnoxious Hawaiian-looking shirt the next day. The second I walked in, he looked me up and down, glared, turned around and walked away. When everyone asked why I was wearing such a ridiculous shirt, I told them about the loophole, and within a week half my office was wearing Hawaiian shirts. It drove my boss crazy, all within the guidelines outlined by company policy. As an update to the story, the boss eventually got fired for getting oral pleasure from one of the girls in the call center while he was in his office. I had already moved on to another company by then, but when I heard, I got a nice chuckle out of it. Thanks for listening.